Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of our Future of series presented by JobsOhio. We're really excited for a fantastic and interesting conversation today around the future of travel. This is a year-long series, which I'll share a little bit about in a moment and what we've been talking about. But for this conversation, we have four leaders that are working in and around this topic, which is very broad, but intentionally, we like to hear different perspectives of people that are working on things from startups to big co's to government and beyond of all that goes into this. And it's really an exciting time. We're seeing in the news things like space tourism, but also our day-to-day lives, mobility, and how we work and live, especially in the past year and a half, 2 years of COVID. This is a really big topic. And so we're absolutely fantastic, really excited to have it and hear from so many people. As I mentioned, we want to thank JobsOhio. I'll be the moderating today, though. I'm Chris Berry, I'm the president of OhioX. As an organization, we're a statewide nonprofit that works to connect, promote, and advocate for technology in the state of Ohio with a goal of helping to build Ohio into a leading tech hub. You can connect with us and find content like this on our LinkedIn, on our Twitter, and our YouTube. And specifically on the YouTube, I want to point out this is being recorded. We have all sorts of on-demand content. This entire series is there. And so it's a great way to find inspiration and ideas and see what's going on across the state. Because that's one of the fun things that we do is from Cleveland to Cincinnati and everywhere in between. There's so much work happening and there's a lot of companies and great ideas and great leaders out there. And we try to just connect it and tell those stories. Today's event is, as I mentioned previously at the beginning, part of a year-long series called The Future of. JobsOhio, at the state's Economic Development Corporation, is our presenting sponsor for it, and we're incredibly grateful for their support and partnership to make it possible. As a year-long series, what we've been doing is each month looking at a different sector or an industry to see what's happening in it and how Ohio people, companies, and ideas are actively building the future. So we started very intentionally with healthcare because of so much that's happening there. But we've also talked about government, real estate, education, insurance, cities, commerce, sports, and today's is travel. We have a couple more the remainder of the year, agriculture and finance. And as I mentioned, we're trying to see what's next, what's been happening the past couple years, and what we should be looking forward to in the future. As part of this conversation, we have, as I mentioned, four great presenters that we're going to hear from in a moment, but we also have a Q&A chat function. Feel free to hop in there. You can introduce yourself if you'd like, or send in comments or questions during the conversation or chat. If you don't want to hop in there and send it to everyone, you're more than welcome to send me a direct message and I can try to work it in as well. And so we're going to get to now our panelists and our conversation with them that are all doing interesting and fascinating work in this space. And so I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, share who they are, what part of Ohio they're from, and what they're working on. It's a fascinating, topic again. There's so many layers to it, but hopefully we'll get a good kind of look from, again, startups to big corporations, the government side and the public sector, what's happening and what we can look forward to. So I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to start with Oskar Bruening, who's up in the Cleveland area, is also newer to Ohio. And so I think that's a fascinating part of this conversation is we get to welcome someone that is newer to the state, but doing some incredibly exciting work at his company, Peak. So Oskar, thanks so much for being here. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your work.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and thanks also for putting this together. I think travel, especially right now, is really exciting and really interesting because there's a lot changing right now. A little bit of background on myself. So I'm originally from Germany. I'm very much on the engineering software side. I started coding when I was 14. Before there was internet, was floppy drive for those of us who remember those. And then went to MIT, did an undergrad and master's there, computer science, electrical engineering. Spent the following 15 years in Silicon Valley, working in large companies and startups and then a year and a half ago, moved out to Cleveland, kind of was looking for a different quality of life, different pace of life, and also just kind of wanted to get out of California after just having been there for a really long time. A little bit about Peak that you mentioned. So about 9 years ago, I started a company called Peak in the travel space, love to travel, background's always been traveling. And it's really focused on the experience component, right? You can book your flight and hotel on the way to the airport. But the reason you go on a vacation is the experiences, the people that you meet, the food that you eat, right, like all these other things that you do. And those are actually shockingly hard to find, right? You go on TripAdvisor, you buy a Lonely Planet guidebook, which, in 2021 is also crazy in its own way. And so Peak was really built with the idea of, hey, how can we help the customer find these things when they're on a trip? Very quickly, we realized there's a much larger problem. A lot of these businesses are small mom and pops, and they don't have technology. And so you can't really sell anything unless you know it's available. And so we actually thought there's a much bigger opportunity building business software for these operators. So what Peak Pro is, which is the bulk of where our energy and effort is basically think about like Square. It's business technology that allows tour operators to run their business, manage their employees, manage their buses and boats and kayaks, and then sell their inventory both online and for walk-ups. And then also obviously service that to the consumer. And it's been really interesting to sort of see where the kind of like tapping into that last question of sort of like what has changed, right? It's experiences are more important than ever, right? I think social media sort of has really become a conduit for that, being like, hey, let me take a selfie on doing something fun. So people always are looking for things to do. But it's also been interesting with COVID because travel was heavily impacted. So people started looking for close at home, right? What can I do here? I'm based in Cleveland. What can I do that's nearby, right? And we have one of our clients is the kayak operator right here down the road. And so consumers are looking more locally, but I think the other interesting piece is also the businesses that used to be more pen and paper with COVID had to adopt technology. And so I think that's been sort of like an interesting trend to see in travel is sort of that adoption and the local experience search.
Great. Thank you so much, Oskar. Appreciate you joining us and sharing what you're up to at Peak. We'll go next to Erin Spring. Erin is at Goodyear, where she works in the venture side and discovering, understanding new technologies, new innovations, and out of Akron, Ohio, which is where I'm originally from. So I always love hearing about Goodyear and seeing the Goodyear blimp just flying around all the time, 24/7, which was pretty awesome growing up. So Erin, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. It's really great to be here and really great to meet the other panelists and learn from them. Appreciate the introduction. I'm lead new ventures at Goodyear, based in Akron, Ohio. Get the opportunity to see that blimp overhead. Hopefully each of you maybe have seen it in other parts of Ohio, also other parts of the country. Always excites me when I see it in the air. So what I do and our interest area at Goodyear and our new ventures team is very much focused on what is mobility going to look like in the future and how do we engage with it today so that we can continue to be a leader in what I call this next mobility ecosystem. We talked about startups as well as a company that has long history. We always like to say, actually, Goodyear was founded kind of at the first inflection point in the automotive industry, this transition from horses and buggies, if we can all imagine it, into automobiles, into providing tires for these horseless carriages that everyone thought were a bit crazy at the time. And that industry has developed over time. And now we're again at this inflection point where we believe transportation and travel is going to look very different given the new technologies available and the potential for really unprecedented safety, accessibility, and hopefully more sustainable modes of transportation. So Goodyear believes that yes, tires are going to be a part of that. Almost everything that goes from point A to point B are on tires, which is great. But there's also this opportunity to say, hey, what's the ecosystem going to look like in the future to support autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and how is Goodyear going to be a part of that, not only with this mechanical connection through our tires to the road, but our digital connection and our knowledge about vehicles. So our new ventures team is focused on helping build that future along with our corporation. And we do that through a lot of different tools. We have our corporate venture fund that we're actively investing. as well as our innovation labs, as we call them, that are embedded in some key mobility ecosystems, looking at, hey, what are the problems that we can help solve for these emerging modes of transportation? What are those new solutions that we can build? And then actually launching them into our own startups that are looking at the industry differently and solving new problems for transportation. So I could talk about that for a while. So excited to do so in this session today. And thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. And now we'll go to Sophia at the Central Ohio Transit Authority, where she is the Chief Innovation Officer. So thanks so much for joining us, and would love to hear what's happening at COTA.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me, and really excited to be part of this session. So I'm in the Central Ohio area, Columbus, Ohio, the Central Ohio Transit Authority, and I've been here about 2 years. And I think sometimes when you think about, my title, Chief Innovation Officer, and a transit authority, you may think like, why are they thinking about innovation? And there's a really key piece here, is that Central Ohio is one of the fastest growing regions in the United States. And the Central Ohio area specifically is expected to add 1 million plus more people in the next 20 years, essentially doubling our population. So when you think about that, and you think about as myself, currently a Central Ohio citizen, what does that mean to how our entire community moves? And what could that mean to the quality of life? But also, what does that mean for access to jobs, access to the store, access to medical needs? You start to really consider, wow, like that's amazing for the Central Ohio area and Ohio in general. But what does that mean to life in general? And that's where at COTA, we have realized that for the Central Ohio area, we are really the mobility backbone. And mobility, we are actually defining that broader than probably what you're thinking about, in terms of it's not just the buses on the street, it is how everyone in this area moves, and that we are part of it. And so we are doing some really interesting things. For example, we'll be rolling out our mobile fare payment system on our vehicles starting in November. We are also looking at artificial intelligence projects that understand to have us be more predictive about how people are moving and when accidents may occur, to make sure that we're focusing on that safety, but also understanding what the trends are in moving. But we really realize that we're going to be at the heart of this growth, and making sure that that growth to the Central Ohio is a positive one, and making sure that everybody who lives here has those access needs, especially those that rely on transit. And then what are some future ways that we need to look at transit? Some of the things have already been mentioned here, but how will technology help us rethink what transit is? Just like Erin had said, we had that inflection point at the beginning of the 19th century, but now we're at a different inflection point, and not just not just about cars, but how we all move, and how technology is going to actually fundamentally change how we may interact with each of these pieces. So it's been a really exciting time, and I know we're going to hit on some of these topics more. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, of course, and looking forward to digging more into some of those as well. Now we'll go to Terry at JobsOhio, which again is working at the intersections of so many things in the state, and it seems like every week Ohio, led by JobsOhio, has a bunch of new announcements, and there's been some exciting ones, which I know we'll get to on the air side as well. But Terry, I'd love to hear about what you're specifically doing with our Economic Development Corporation.
Right. Thanks, Chris. So I'm Vice President of Sites and Infrastructure for JobsOhio. Been with JobsOhio now for a couple of years. My background, I was in the aviation industry for about 25 years. I was the director at three different airport systems. Also have a background in development work. Primarily at JobsOhio, I oversee our sites and infrastructure programs. And we've been, this year, our 10th anniversary year has just been a fantastic year. for economic growth in the state. We've seen a lot of great activity around the state. We actually average about 23,000 jobs created through a little over 300 projects in a typical year. We've already hit that metric halfway through October this year. So, in spite of the pandemic, it has, I think, provided a lot of opportunity for Ohio. That's exciting. But I think to all of our panelists today that are speaking, it's really about the future. We talk a lot at JobsOhio about generational opportunity, and we really believe that this is a generational opportunity for the state. And so how can we leverage that opportunity? So, a lot of the new programs we've stood up, what we call JobsOhio 2.0, our site initiatives, our innovation districts that we've stood up in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. A lot of our effort right now is how can we position the state as a leader in the Midwest, and then continue to lead as we come out of the pandemic. And I know today I was going to talk about air service. I'm very passionate about aviation and air service, and feel very fortunate that our board in 2020 agreed to fund an air service restoration program. And really the goal of the program was recognizing the impact on air service as a result of the pandemic, the loss of service, and could we take advantage of really a leveling of the playing field with all of our competing states. Everyone was facing the same conditions that we were facing in air service. There was a point in May where we lost 95% of our commercial air service, not only in Ohio, but across the country. And so as that air service comes back, can we have a program that makes us more competitive? The airlines in January had 50% of their fleet was on the ground. Some of it has been permanently, retired. But as they bring aircraft back, can we make Ohio competitive to get aircraft ahead of other states? And so that's really what we've been focused on, and I can talk more about that certainly. But glad to be on the panel today. I want Erin to keep talking. I want to find out what Goodyear's doing. Sounds exciting.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Terry. And we have a ton to talk to, and one of my favorites, just as an aside on these, is we could blow through the hour, and so that's what's exciting because there's just so much going on. But I want to kind of piggyback after a couple comments, but really, Terry, you had mentioned, with COVID, so many difficulties, and I'll probably start with Oskar first, since you work with a ton of companies out there, and then open it up to others. But we've, COVID difficulties, we know that, and we've lived through that. But especially when technology is involved and kind of the future of and building, opportunities arise. And Terry's mentioned it with air service, with the cuts, as restoration comes back, how can Ohio be more competitive? But I'd be curious, each of you, and again, we'll start with Oskar, on just the opportunities that you've seen in the past year and a half, 2 years of COVID that helped accelerate the innovation in your space, the work you're doing that maybe wouldn't have happened had COVID not, come into our world. And so, Oskar, what are you seeing as some of the opportunities that have been built over the past year and a half?
I think so what's interesting for us for peak was when COVID obviously hit and travel hit, everything just stopped, right? And then, we went through a difficult couple of months, and then everything came back really quickly. Because over the summer, people were, as I mentioned earlier, right, they were looking for something locally to do rather than having to do traveling, right? They're looking actually like, hey, what can I do at home and what's near to home? And I think the opportunity we saw that rebound. And as a result, these businesses that had been operating in a particular way, never really saw the need to adopt technology, all of a sudden realized they need to have cashless payments or touchless payments. They need to have volume control, right? They need to manage when people are coming. They can't have 100 people show up at 9 a.m. and nobody at 10. They need to even that out. They need time in between for sanitation and all of those kind of things. And that gets really hard to do with your pen and paper approach in the past, right? So we've had businesses who were forced to adopt technology, And then now they're like, oh my God, that was crazy that we did it with pen and paper before, right? We are saving so much in labor and all of these things where like high inefficiencies in the business are now gone. We didn't even realize we could do that with technology. And now these people that are not doing sort of the menial tasks, they now really focus on a better customer experience. And I think that's sort of the second piece of that. And that's sort of, I think, where a lot of these things are going to tie together is, as a consumer, we end up having a much better experience, right? I can book things on my phone now. I don't have to call. I don't get on a wait list. I know exactly what's available. It's been interesting to see sort of the rise of the QR codes over the last year, right? Until then, it was sort of like, it's been around for 30 years. For the longest time, it was something that like nobody will ever understand what a QR code is, right? Nobody will ever use it. Asia had sort of like started adopting it really fast, but in the US, it wasn't a thing. And now you go to a restaurant and your menu is on a QR code, right? And it's just like Zoom, people adopted to it quickly, but now it streamlines the customer experience. Now I actually can much better connect with the business. I have a better experience before, during, and after whatever I'm doing. And I think that also taps probably into transportation, for example, right? Like I don't need paper tickets anymore, right? Like a lot of these things are much more online. And I think COVID accelerated that, which I think is sort of very exciting to see come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And others, feel free to jump in at any point, but Erin, I see you unmuted, so we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I was, really resonated, Oskar, your comments on just the kind of overnight digital experiences that popped up out of necessity, and on the business operator side, but I think on that consumer adoption, many of those experiences that some of us were using just out of convenience, suddenly people had to use them out of necessity. So things like, I think we all know Instacart growing overnight. I think I was the only one using it before. And then, you hear people you never expected to be using it out of necessity, which is very interesting, which has led to this quick acceleration and adoption of these digital experiences that I'm not sure. I think I can't tell you when it would have happened otherwise, but I feel like it's accelerated it. We saw, for example, which I never thought I'd be talking about something like this on a panel, but one of the companies that we invested in through our corporate venture fund is Starship Technologies, which is a sidewalk robot delivery company that focuses on doing deliveries on university campuses as well as kind of city areas for groceries. And they have just posted, I think they hit their 2 million delivery mark, 1 million of those deliveries in the last 9 months. So it's been really interesting to see how things suddenly are moving differently and then enabled by these digital experiences, I'd say on the front end and on the back end. And so we'll see. I think they'll stick around. It's just accelerated that acceptance from the consumer.
Yeah, I think the same thing's true, right, with this format we're on right now with Zoom and the ability to do this. I think about the last major disruption in air service was September 11th, 2001, and the entire system was shut down for 2.5 days, from Tuesday morning until Thursday afternoon. But then air service went back, came back in a couple of days, and within a year, a little over a year, the industry recovered. They went through a recession. This has been much different, and these other ways to communicate, these other platforms have emerged. We've had a much longer period of time where we've had to address this, and I think, when you look at the industry, we're at about 80% of our capacity is back in the airline industry right now in Ohio. And so you wonder, with international travel kind of on hold now until probably 2023 for a lot of corporations, that's about 10 to 12% of the industry's revenue and activity. You kind of wonder where is that activity going to end up? I mean, it was growing at a tremendous rate before COVID. So will that growth come back, and it'll just accelerate beyond whatever it loses, in the business markets because of these new ways to communicate. Because I don't think when this is over, any of us are probably walking away from Zoom calls. We've all found, that it's a benefit to our business and the way we do business. So it'll be interesting to see how that recovery, unfolds.
Absolutely. And Sophia, I'd love to turn to you, because as whether it's the sidewalk deliveries or in Oscar's bigger sense, as someone who's physically moved from one part of the country to Ohio, I think of kind of the disruptions and opportunities of, at that local level for us as individuals and where we live and the neighborhoods that we're at. And you mentioned 1 million new people are going to be moving to Central Ohio in the coming years. But how has the past year and a half and that kind of trend of how people are going about their lives, they're traveling, just to the grocery stores or, visiting friends and family regionally, how has that kind of shift in thinking occurred in your work of people reassessing that work-life balance, what we're hoping to get, where they're moving to? Is it urban? Is it rural? Is it a combination? Those types of things. So I'd be curious your perspective on these themes.
Sure. A couple of points to that great question. I think one thing that we had to do very quickly is to look at our data. Because even though we are a public entity, we knew that we didn't have to assume like, well, we'll just continue to have the routes that we have and the times that we had, because that's not where the community needed us. And I'll give you a really good example of that. With COVID, as you can imagine, everyone went through a shift, and we had to determine if we needed to slow down or perhaps pause certain lines. And we did that in the northeast area of Columbus. We very quickly heard from our customers about how much they relied on COTA. And what we were able to enable very quickly was the first bus on demand in the United States, second in North America. Canada beat us on this, but COTA did the first full-time bus on demand. So what was amazing about this is that it's just like an Uber or Lyft. You use an app, but instead of having it come to your house, you go to a transit stop and you call the vehicle. It works exactly the same way. And we were experiencing about a 12 to 15 minute response time to that. So you can imagine how for the community where they were at an area where they might have lost transit, and we came up with an innovative way that actually was probably faster than what they were getting, because it was, I believe it was like a 30-minute line. And I think that is where COVID has caused, I think, every organization to think differently, because it would have been very hard in normal times to say, hey, by the way, we're stopping this route and this is going to be bus on demand. I'm not sure it would have happened. But in this instant, our community and our organization was more open to figuring out what are some new things that we can do that are a little bit different. And I think that that's such a great example that is still running in the Northeast area. I do know that other cities in the United States have now actually also rolled out bus on demand after seeing that what we did. So I think that's just a great example of really showing how a public entity responded to the needs and being able to launch something that I don't think would have been as easy to launch in a regular environment.
Yeah, that's terrific. And Terry, please.
I think Sophia, we've seen the same thing in the air service industry,
Mm-hmm.
where, the airlines, it would have been unheard of pre-COVID to see some of the leisure market service that legacy airlines have been putting into the marketplace. I mean, we lost 63 routes as a result of COVID, and the 36 routes that have come back are 38. 32 of them are leisure markets, whereas only 6 are more traditional business markets. And you're seeing legacy carriers introduce leisure service for 4 months during the summer, doing something that, you would expect a Allegiant or Frontier, one of the low-cost carriers, to do. Now you have, legacies like United and American Airlines introducing service like that. So the disruption has definitely created some new models that you would not you would not have seen occur, before COVID.
Yeah, I think it's really has pushed all of us to be more dynamic, especially entities, as you were mentioning, about who would have just stayed with their existing model, that we've had to be more dynamic and figure out ways to be more dynamic to respond to the needs.
One commentary that you had and the role of JobsOhio is looking at and seizing this generational opportunity that our state has. And I'd love to kind of use that as a prompt for individual questions. And what I find fascinating is each of you are kind of tackling that in a unique way to your work. And, Oskar, you're doing it as a high growth tech startup. And in Ohio, our state just passed annually this year $2 billion in venture capital investment, which is the first time ever. And it's actually double the previous high from last year of 1.1 billion. Erin, you're doing it at one of America's most iconic brands and building the future of mobility. And Sophia, your work is literally shaping and building one of, the most exciting, and I say this as a resident, one of the most exciting cities in America with the growth and how we can live and work. And so, Oskar, I'll start with you as you look at this part of the world, the travel, the mobility, but with your kind of role as a high tech growth entrepreneur, how do you see opportunities for Ohio? And as we continue to build, those venture capital dollars are coming in, which historically hasn't been the kind of case for cities and states like ours. But what are those things that we could perhaps seize on to take some of this momentum, take this generational opportunity and build upon it?
I think that's a great question that probably like every one of the 50 states is asking. I think there's two things in my mind. I think the first one, and this is sort of more, the outsider perspective observation. Part of the reason I love Ohio is sort of, it's a hardworking, humble, sort of very down to earth environment. Which basically, when you talk about funding, right, my big fear is like the seed funding is not there, right? Seed funding really means high risk investments, right? And they're not big check sizes. I mean, they can be, but they're not big check sizes, but 9 out of 10 of those investments will fail. And I think that's sort of a cultural, that's a cultural sort of, I think Ohio tends to be a little bit more risk averse, and you prefer to invest in Series B or Series C when the business model is proven, when you have product market fit and all of those things. But if you want to start building a culture of entrepreneurship and you want to have more, you want to have the next TikTok based out of Ohio, you don't know what's going to work, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure the TikTok people didn't know what they were building, right? So that early investment needs to be there, and it needs to be okay to fail, right? And I think that's a little bit of a shift that needs to happen. I think the other piece that's maybe a little bit more tangible, and I actually would love to hear Terrence's thought on this, is the remote jobs, right? So Peak has moved from offices. We used to have offices in 3 or 4 different locations. We are remote first, remote only. We don't have any offices anymore. And a lot of other companies are doing the same thing. And so, we're traditional B2B SaaS platform. 20% of us is engineering, 80 is sales, it's support, it's marketing, it's finance, right? Like that is skills that are available pretty much anywhere. And it's interesting because a lot of, like, I helped my brother-in-law, he's based here out of Cleveland, he's looking for a job. And it's really hard to find these remote jobs because all the these job sites require you to give a location. And we're like, we'll hire anywhere. And so Peak actually basically rotate every week, we post the same jobs, but in a different city, right? Just to reach this remote employees or candidates in those cities. And so, and so the tip obviously for my brother-in-law is look at remote jobs in other cities, right? Don't just look for jobs here in Ohio. So I'm kind of wondering, right, how can Ohio help with that, right? Is there something where, it makes it easier for anybody in Ohio who's willing to work from home to have access, to be aware that there's jobs that are not necessarily listed in Ohio, but that they're available to them, right? And that they might need to, they need to look at San Francisco, Seattle, wherever, right? Like work for those remote jobs. I think that will help really bring a lot of tech jobs into, or if you figure out how to game that system and really enable Ohioans to kind of find these jobs, I think that's really, really powerful.
Yeah. Thank you, Oskar. And Erin, love to turn to you of that kind of a similar question, but using your Goodyear perspective of, again, a leading iconic American brand that's doing, of course, does work globally. But as we think of creating, this or seizing this Ohio generational opportunity, how do you see that in your work and being an Akron, Ohio proud company, and continuing to build on the success of such an incredible history for your company?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely not one answer. There's a lot of different answers. It's a pretty big question. I mean, first to comment, Oskar, on your comments, I think it's a really interesting change in paradigm in how we think about, where we live and where we work. And the two of them don't always have to be together, which opens up the talent market. It also opens up maybe even how, as a state, we think about building, continuing to build it as such a great place to live. So that's just one comment there. I think as we think about it at Goodyear specifically, it's not only about continuing to provide great products, which are mostly tires in almost every different application, but also servicing the vehicle car park of today. But what does that future look like, and making sure that we have the key capabilities to make our business more efficient, more sustainable, and potentially brand new offerings. And a lot of those capabilities, and I think, Chris, how we originally met is around adding new competencies in tech, in software engineering, in analytics, and in machine learning, all the buzzwords of the hottest jobs right now. And so really looking at how do we leverage that talent, also showcase why Ohio is actually a great place to live and work, as well as we access talent globally today. We really look at often kind of that hybrid model. You can access talent from anywhere, but it's also nice to be together once in a while.
Thanks, Erin. And Sophia, I'd love to turn to you and maybe ask it more specifically with Columbus and Central Ohio in mind, because I live here as well. And there's just such an excitement over the city and the growth and the opportunity. And, as we think of even just tech specifically, there's an excitement to kind of the tech sector here. But of course, there's that balance of, the work life of why people have left coastal cities, because it's tough to get that. But you mentioned earlier this kind of large growth that we're expecting to have. I'd be curious, as you look in 5, 10, 15 years, and a lot of your work as a chief innovation officer is looking for those future opportunities or finding challenges and figuring out how to make them into opportunities. What do you think the keys are to continue this amazing trajectory for our city as you think of mobility and the travel within it?
That's a great question. I think one of the keys to it is probably, I think what we're all saying in different ways is redefining what our organizations are and what they may have done in the past to determine where we go in the future. I briefly mentioned, and this is what I'm going to mention next is a great example of this, is a project that we're working on. Again, I don't think you would consider a transit agency to do, but it's an artificial intelligence project that is going to try to understand how we are growing and how people are moving differently. Again, it's COTA. This technology has been rolled out in other cities, but COTA is the first transit authority to bring all these different pieces together. And basically, it's bringing together information and data from the 13 county region to come up with a traffic management system. So if you can imagine, if you think about all the different regions and all the data that each of these groups are holding, and what would happen if you were able to integrate all of those pieces of data to be more predictive? So what does Franklin County have? What does ODOT have? What do the adjoining counties have? Because, when we're moving around, we're not really considering about where we are and who has what data. But imagine if we could bring all of those pieces of data together and really understand, if we had this integrated mobility project that brings this information together to be more predictive. Imagine how we can help with safety. I know that Ohio, or the Central Ohio City of Columbus, has a Vision Zero initiative. Imagine what we could do if we could be more predictive with that data, understand or prevent when incidents may occur. That's really, really powerful. That's really powerful information. And it's different than how I think public entities have thought about themselves before. They've always been worried about their own citizens, which they should, because that's what their mission is. But imagine what they could do if they integrated with other regions and brought all those pieces of data together, because actually it helps them too. That data from other areas will actually help serve their citizens better, because they'll understand how people are moving, where the growth is, help prevent those incidents and accidents. So I think it's really exciting, the possibilities that something like that could do. And we're already started that project. We received a grant from the USDOT to start this initiative. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this, but I think it's just really exciting to figure out what's coming next and understanding our community in a more data-centric fashion.
That's fantastic. And that's actually a perfect segue to our next question, which we'll kind of do as a round robin as we're starting to kind of come close to the end of our time. But it's basically, as you just answered, Sophia, of, what would be, and Terry, we'll start with you first on this one, or go to you next. But what is an interesting, kind of piece of tech or innovation, or, and again, perfect example just now of using data, using emerging technologies like artificial intelligence to, for certain outcomes to, reduce or increase safety. And it doesn't have to be that, but in your work, and it can be either something you've worked on directly or just something that's out there that you've been seeing, keeping an eye on, and you've just been fascinating to see it kind of uncover, but you wish more people knew about. So Terry, we'll go to you first.
I think the big thing that I've been able to be involved in is electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, the new eVTOLs, and the fact that Ohio, through our relationship with the Air Force and the folks at Wright Pat Air Force Base and Agility Prime, that we've been able to bring the 5 leading companies in the world to Springfield Beckley Airport in Ohio to demonstrate those vehicles to the Air Force. And that Agility Prime and AFWorks, the effort stood up by the Air Force, is not your typical Air Force government procurement program, but they're really encouraging innovation from the private sector and being able to transfer that innovation then to use by the Air Force. And it really gives Ohio an opportunity to not only, build on the relationships with the Air Force, but to build on the relationships with these companies as they come to Ohio. And we, JobsOhio, we've been able to participate in putting infrastructure in at Springfield Beckley for their simulators. And now we're part of a larger program to build a center of excellence there for these companies to be able to set up shop and to bring their vehicles here. That is really exciting for me. Electric propulsion, the announcement just made by General Electric, they've been funded under a NASA program to pursue electric propulsion engines for aviation. That to me is all very exciting stuff. And what's exciting is it's in Ohio. It's in the state that has the 7th largest aerospace workforce in the country, and that we're able to attract that there. And really the end game is we don't want just the demonstrations. We want them to be successful. We want them to manufacture their vehicles and their aircraft in Ohio, and really for the first time in 60 years, to be able to build airframes again in the state. So that to me is really exciting.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that, especially the Springfield and the vertical takeoff and vehicles that are happening, because that's one of my favorite things to just follow along. I have nothing to do with it, but I love reading in the newspaper and some of the media reports and seeing, as you mentioned, companies from New York and Austin, Texas coming to Ohio to test and work on their technology. So that's fantastic. We'll go to Oskar next. So Oskar, anything that you've been seeing that you're just fascinated by or you just love following along?
It's a boring topic. I don't know. Maybe it's not that boring, but it's sort of, I think everything around batteries, and Ohio is actually really, really great at that. But you have the electric vehicles are dramatically on the rise. You have all the electronic components, every phone, everything is getting smaller, and every sort of little improvement on a battery just has repercussions for the whole industry. And so it's something that's sort of like very foundational. Nobody likes to really think about batteries, but I think like also they have to be more green and sustainable, right? There's so many more things that need to come and that will come with batteries. I think that I find that fascinating, because in the end, that literally powers everything that happens in the tech industry. And it's really exciting to kind of see that Ohio has a big stake in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. How about yourself, Erin?
Yeah, certainly. I think you all kind of mentioned some favorite topics, even batteries, Oskar, are important to us. And I'd love to talk about the eVTOL space as well. I thought I would maybe build on something Sophia said. One of the things that we're excited about, I talked early on about, hey, Goodyear providing this mechanical connection to the road, but also providing now and in the future kind of that digital feedback from the road. And that's where we tie back to batteries, because having a sensor in many of our products that maybe will be battery powered or not. There's a lot of different technologies out there, but starts to allow us to provide what we say kind of line of sight to that interaction with the road. The state of your tire, what possibly could happen in the future if you're not maintaining it correctly, and several other use cases. So we recently announced Goodyear Sightline, which is our suite of technologies that are digitizing the tire, providing that line of sight to the road, and providing information that can plug back into more efficiently managing your fleets today, and then in the future, understanding truly that contact patch with the road to make AV systems smarter and hopefully safer. So some future things where we're going to plug into, and some products that we are offering today. So it's going to be a journey, certainly, but we set out a goal to have intelligence in all of our products by 2027, and we're working towards that. So I'm excited to share a bit of that with you. And also back to Terrence, your comment, I can't wait to hopefully maybe make a hop on an eVTOL from Cleveland down to Columbus and make a really easy day trip out of it.
Thank you, Erin, for that. We'll do two of our final questions as kind of wrapping this up that we ask at the conclusion of all of our events like these. We'll do one and allow everyone an opportunity to answer. And so the order for both will be Erin, Sophia, Oskar, and then Terry. And then we'll do kind of the next question, and Terry, you'll be able to wrap it up. But the first one is kind of a fun one, not necessarily travel related, although you might have to travel to get there. But what is your favorite place in Ohio? You have a day off, a weekend, maybe family or friends coming into town. Where are you going? What are you doing? And what's your spot in the Buckeye State? So Erin, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, I think it's probably the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. I just read it's one of the most visited national parks in the country. I don't know that everyone always knows about it, but whether it's hiking the trails, biking the towpath, there's even a train that goes through, which is a great way to see it. A couple small towns, but it's really absolutely beautiful. So many different hikes to do, so many different things to do. So that's a place that we enjoy exploring on the weekends.
That's great. Sophia?
One thing I rediscovered was the wilds. It's about an hour outside Columbus, and I don't know the acreage size, but kind of having an opportunity to see a lot of wild animals. You just don't feel like you're in Ohio when you go there. It's a really fun thing that our family has enjoyed.
That's great. Great answer. Oskar.
The metro parks. I think I still relatively new, still discovering new ones. And it's like these hidden gems spread out everywhere. And coming from California, where seasons is sort of a foreign word, it's like you can go back and every time you see something new and it's different and it doesn't get boring. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, especially with the perfect time for leaf peeping. So get outside into the parks. Terry.
Usually it's in a baseball park somewhere, either with one of my kids. I still have two left that are playing, or in one of the major minor league parks in the state. We have a lot of great baseball in Ohio, and that's probably my favorite place to be.
Perfect. Final question, same order of answering. And Erin, you had a great one of hopping in, quick day trips down from northeastern Ohio to Columbus. But what's a prediction as you think about the future of travel? And again, it can be something in your, specific work. It could be something crazy like can't wait to, go on a Blue Origin rocket in 5 years and be a space tourist. Although you might need to win the lottery for that one at the moment. But what is a prediction, something that you're geeking out on as you think about what the future of travel may look like?
Certainly, and I think I already shared mine, but maybe I'll add some more detail. I had an opportunity to meet with and speak to Joby Aviation, for example, and they have this really bold goal, and I'm sure you know of it. To be the largest aviation or airline in the next, I don't know exact timing, with the idea that they're going to be doing the most number of landings. So I think my prediction and my hopeful prediction is that we're going to have a lot more choice on how to get from point A to point B. And hopefully that, ups that level of service and just makes it a lot more enjoyable. So we're connected on video, but hopefully we can be connected better in person in the future.
Great. Thank you. Sophia.
I have two things. I don't know if they're really predictions. I think maybe things I'm excited about. One, kind of we were just saying, the opportunity to travel to other places perhaps a little easier, not just nationally, but internationally, I think is really exciting. And then the other one I think is going to be really exciting is how 5G is going to be integrated with our transportation and what that allows us to do, not just from opportunities, but also from a safety point of view regarding, latency of information. I think there's just so many opportunities with 5G that can be really exciting that we've only started to think about scratching the surface on those areas.
Yeah, another great emerging technology that's sure to have some massive impact in everything in this space specifically. Oskar.
I think I'm excited. There seems to be a way of moving away from sort of mass tourism, people getting more picky. And I think with COVID, everybody sort of has their list. Oh, once I can travel again, I'm going to go there and I'm going to do these 5 things, right? I think there is sort of much more of a drive towards finding the hidden gems, having a more personalized experience. And I think that's really, and having a more deeper connection with wherever you're going. And so I'm actually really excited about that.
Very cool. Thank you. Terrence.
I think the next thing I'm watching is how we provide the power, the electricity for the industry. I think there's going to be a collision of demand for electric as electric vehicles. We're now talking about jet propulsion. I think the utilities probably have plans for that, but I'm really interested to see how that unfolds. There's talk of being able to drive an electric vehicle down the highway and have it automatically charging. How is that technology going to unfold? Because we all know the challenges as a country we've faced with infrastructure, utility infrastructure, especially with electric. And so I think that is going to be a challenge that I'll be excited to see how we meet that challenge.
Absolutely. Well, all great answers, and this has been a fascinating conversation. Could have continued this for much more time and dug into 1,000,001 topics, but by design, it's want to hear from different perspectives and for leaders that are working on this from different angles, doing different things. But everything we've talked about has and will impact our lives and how we live and work in Ohio's position in this generational opportunity. So I want to thank everyone who's watching, who will be watching. I want to thank our 4 panelists. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon and spending an hour with us to share your work and what you're excited about, what you're passionate about. And also, finally, I want to thank JobsOhio for all their work and being the presenting sponsor for this year-long series. Again, every month we're looking at a different sector or industry. And so today and this month is travel. Next month, we're actually going to be talking about agriculture and some of the stuff around sustainability. And water innovation that's actually happening in the States. So that's going to be a great one. And then we're going to end in December with finance and fintech and what's happening there. And another, exciting space that's rapidly evolving and changing. But again, thank you, everyone, our panelists. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. A terrific conversation. And we appreciate everyone taking time to talk a little bit about the future of travel with us today. So thanks so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.